Thank you, Matt. Greetings, everybody. I hope you can hear me. It's great to see so many people on the call this evening. That's great. I'd like to acknowledge our in-house facilitators who I hope will be joining us in the conversation because we want to have conversations about this. I see David Hatchful, our senior facilitator, who's done a lot of work in this space. And so, David, you have to get ready. I'm going to be calling you. I see Kofi Jemfi, another senior facilitator, I would say. Let me put it that Kofi has done a lot of workshops with us. I see Kelvin, I see Brian, I see great to see you. Thank you for I think it was Raphael from Duapa Workspace. Is that Raphael? And Betty, all the way from Zimbabwe. Wonderful. Good to see you again. Yeah, wonderful. So this is a topic that our guys came up with when we were discussing topics for the year. And the idea is that as a design thinking group of professionals, if you will, or group of professionals who follow design thinking, we think that there's a lot of head knowledge of the design thinking process, but maybe not as much experience of people doing design thinking. So we're very excited to start talking about, some of these topics about, topics that deal directly with how to apply it in organization. So this conversation is about how do you implement a design thinking innovation project, or how do you use design thinking to simulate an innovation project or build systems in your organization, even if you feel like you're not ready, right? So you're not saying, I'm waiting to innovate. You're saying, I want to innovate now. What can I do? So in terms of agenda, we'll be talking about why companies or corporations need to continually innovate. You can't, it's not an option. How companies are innovating without disrupting their regular routines, which is what a lot of organizations are worried about. If you bring something new now, you have to change what you're doing, right? But how can you try new things without changing what you're doing? We're going to talk about simulations and sandboxes, how design thinking can support simulations and sandboxes, and then hopefully we can spend a little bit of time in the breakout room doing a quick activity. So I'm going to run through the first part of this so that we can do some activity, hopefully. Just before I go on, I also want to say that my Teresa was supposed to be my co-facilitator, but had to go on a trip. So she did a little video. And in that video, she talks about an ideal course on design thinking that she took that speaks to how to jumpstart new things like simulations for innovation. So I'll play her video later on. All right, so why companies and corporations need to continually innovate? The idea here is that everything goes through a life cycle. Everything that grows also dies. Now, if you're a company and you're growing, chances are you're almost at the height of your growth and you're going to die very soon, right? And so what it means is that as you're growing around here, you have to innovate. You don't have a choice. If you look into history, you will see that. On the left, you remember all those guys. On the right, you remember the ones that replaced them, right? In many ways. So innovation is not something that you can choose to do. Innovation is something that companies have to do. So if they are saying, we don't want to disrupt our current systems, we don't know where to start, those are not the right responses. The right responses are, or the right questions to ask are, how do we start? Maybe even now that we don't feel like we need to change something, right? And please put comments in the box as we go along. We'll pick them up. So another angle to this is that when you introduce products into the market, they go through a diffusion curve, right? So if you're a company that's focused on one thing today, that thing is going through a diffusion process. Adoption on the market has a tipping point, it goes up and it comes down. It goes with the cycle of the company as well. And maybe your cycle as a company is wrapped around the cycle of your key product, right? So if your key product goes down, you go down. You see a lot of examples like that. So that is to say that, the life cycle and the diffusion curve sort of have this, dance through the way companies progress in their lives. Now, what does it mean? What it means is that normally there are these things called S curves. And it's the idea that innovation is the concept of jumping an S curve, right? So you have a key product, you get to that point where of discontinuity, you take your core competence from that key product, you start another one, right? The example that is easy to give, not because, it's just easy to give, is Apple, right? Apple was a computer company. It started with the iPod. It was a music device, not a computer. But when you think about it, they took some core competencies from the way they built computers and so forth and brought it to the music device. So they jumped the S curve onto a new one, music device. They didn't kill laptops. They left them jump onto a new solution. Then they went to the iPhone. The iPhone was not a computer. Well, you know what I mean? It's not a laptop. It's not a music device. It's a communication device, right? But again, you can say that they jumped another S curve there by taking key core competence from the way they make these, the way they make the laptop, the OS, the features, and so forth, and they built a communication device. So that in many ways is the boilerplate for innovation, right? You reach your key product reaches maturity, you look for core competence, you use it to jump onto another S curve, and so forth. That way you sustain your organization and you don't die off, Of course, in Africa, we do it differently. Like we just, if you have a real estate company, the next thing we start is a pure water business, completely different markets. And there are good reasons for that, because our systems are, political and so forth. But the point here is that companies have to innovate, right? Companies have to innovate. And so the question we should be asking is, when you say you are around where the red spot is, how are you going to innovate without disrupting your regular routine today? How are you going to innovate without disrupting your regular routine today? I don't want it to be like a lecture. So I'm going to pause here for a second and invite, thoughts, right? I can put a couple of you on the spot. David, I told you, I'm going to put you on the spot. Eugene is on as well.
Oh, I think I would probably say a word or two.
Hi, Dr. Gordon. So sorry. My mute button, I couldn't seem to mute, but Kofi, please go ahead. I'll come in after.
All right, sure. So, Prof, the one thing you mentioned that I think is critical to the innovations dialogue from a design thinking perspective, as you had called out, in jumping the S curve to innovate in your company, you don't need an entirely different set of expertise. You can leverage the internal expertise to jump the S curve. And what is critical there, particularly for some of our business people on the call, is what really gets teams to innovate quickly is if you're able to put together a team of really diverse people. So you want to pick someone from R&D, pick someone from marketing, pick someone from sales operations, pick someone from supply chain, and put them together so they can all leverage their core competence and challenge ideas at the very early stage before you are able to, get to a point where you can take to market. This is really proving to get us ideas that's on normal you wouldn't get to. So 2 points. 1, utilize your core competence that you already built internally. 2, put teams together to be able to accelerate and get very different perspective at the very early stage of the innovation. And that is a sure way to move forward on the innovations journey.
That's wonderful. Yeah, really like that. Leverage what you have, the core competence. Yeah. Brian.
Yeah, hello. Hi, sorry. Again, my own mute. Yeah, Kofi, that was brilliant. And you took the words literally out of my mouth. I guess it's just always important to remember that you don't have to look far in order to innovate. And usually as a company, even like with the example you were mentioning, Dr. Gordon, around Apple and all its products it's built, like if you look at Apple's products today, all of them are powered by the same chip. So the silicon chip, and I think now there's the M2 chip. So although they have all these different iterations, is that core innovation that leads all the new products and powers all of them. So I think in defining what your key selling point is and defining what your customers actually want from you, that clarity also defines the direction in which you innovate. So even as a company, whether you feel like you've not grown enough, I think it's always good to still understand what exactly is it that I innovate with or I'm known for, that even when I get to that point of growing, I have to make sure to keep on my product. So it's not always only about, oh, I feel like I'm mature, then I'm dying. So what branch am I holding on to? But it's about what am I even growing from before I get to that point of maturity. So I think that's like my 2 cents to add.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's great. Great. Is that Brian? Okay. Yeah. Spot on, right? You can say, well, that's what corporations do. No, you're a startup, you have to be thinking about it. It might be customer service for you. It might be just back-end operations. It might be, it might not be a product in the front, something, a technology that powers your product that you offer in the product. It might be the support structure that provides that unique offering, right? That powers that unique offering. And you have to be able to identify and ask yourself, how can we leverage this support structure in something else, right? Because if you don't innovate, if you're growing and you did nothing, the law, the natural law of life cycle says that you will die. You will die a natural death if you did nothing. So innovation is not an option. It is something that companies have to do. But how do companies innovate when they are fearful of disrupting their regular routines? This is where we progress. This is where we go to the concept of simulations, just to look at how companies out there are using simulations, right? So what is a simulation? A process of creating an artificial environment or a system that imitates or replicates the behavior of a real-world situation, process, or system, right? It involves the use of, all these things to generate data, mimic behavior, and so forth. It's used to test theories, products, and so forth, right? So what are some examples? This is, I always like to go back into history. War is one of the things that is simulated heavily almost all the time, right? So armies will simulate war. You hear about countries coming together and doing joint exercises, the US and whoever it is, I think it's Korea, doing exercises around some islands or, part of this was some some simulations that were done prior to the Iraq War, right? Where they set up in Nevada, the US Air Force has a base in a simulation grounds in Nevada where they run a lot of simulations before they go into combat, So simulations are something that some organizations do and do well, like the military, that we can learn from. This is another example of, this is called the MRAP. It's a vehicle that is able to withstand explosive devices, and this is a test, right? So as I go on, you say, oh, but this is like prototyping. Yes, it's simulating the situation that you're in various ways. We can think of paper simulation or prototyping of a solution or paper prototyping of a solution, a tangible solution, also as a simulation of how it's used. So it's not the actual thing, but it is a simulation of a system that is a replica of the actual thing. I put a picture up here of the one laptop per child. I did some work at the company one of the companies that helped develop it, and they spent so much time designing the keyboard so that it will not be used by adults, so that it will be uncomfortable for adults. Why? Because they wanted the laptop to go to children and not older people, right? When there's corruption and all of that. So they spent so many models, so many simulations, getting bigger hands to type on it and tweaking it so that it became more and more uncomfortable for people with bigger hands. But we know of simulations in so many other spaces, right? So, this is somebody is right. This is a space, an orbital space flight simulator that does a really good job in simulating the experience in outer space. This is a hacker simulation process where hackers or people who are sort of simulating the hacking experience will try to perform a variety of tasks like hacking into computer systems, cracking passwords, and all of that. All of these are available. They are around us. Companies are using them to innovate, right? So that they can build on their user experiences and improve on their products. This is a system that helps simulate complex systems in a variety of industries: manufacturing, logistics, supply chain, and so forth. You change the nodes, you vary the nodes, and you see what will happen. FedEx actually has something similar for tracking the global supply chain, and they have a number of simulation models on it as well. Now, what we've also noticed is that a lot of these simulations happen in what we call sandboxes. So again, I'm coming back to the US Air Force, the Nevada space that they have. This was an article that was saying that even though it was vast, it still feels small when you think about a sandbox for simulating global warfare, right? So what is a sandbox? It brings together all kinds of kids. A typical sandbox will bring together all kinds of kids in an open but finite space that encourages exploration and interaction. So in the same way you take it to the corporate setting, a corporate sandbox in that sense will be a type of collaboration and interaction, an open space, or communal space. You can have virtual meetings and so forth, so many other activities that will support innovation. The main purpose of a sandbox, an innovation sandbox, is to foster innovation by reducing the barriers to experimentation and exploration, and provides a safe space for organizations to take risks and test new ideas without fear of failure. Why without fear of failure? Because the sandbox is not connected to the real system, the regular system. So if it breaks, you learn from it. The regular system does not break. And there are so many examples. I talk to people at MTN, some of the fintechs, and when David is back online, we can ask him to share some examples as well. And most of them have sandboxes where, it's a replica of the system that they have, and they test things out there before they roll them out, right? So the question is, what is your sandbox? What would it look like? What are some of the features of a sandbox? You have connectors. So for instance, you have people that will know how to or who to connect for a particular simulation, right? And then you have sort of the framing of the sandbox. The same way in the real world, you have a box and you pour the sand in, right? So if you take that, whether you're taking it to the digital world, whether you're taking it to a role play situation, you still need to create that frame for it, so that you can contain the exploration within the sandbox, like they said, so that the sand doesn't leak. And you also need some speed and space and so forth. Some examples The New York Times has a sandbox where they experiment with new digital products. So they focus on how to deliver news and content to readers, including, trying out mobile apps, trying out virtual reality experiences, data-driven journalism, so many examples that they try out before they roll out. Google, we know, does a lot of work in this space. Google X, it operates like a sandbox where they try out a number of projects, every now and then you get an invitation to be part of a test or a simulation that's being run in a sandbox, right? When things break, it doesn't affect regular operations. So, and then of course, it's very common in software development. That's where you see it the most, other applications. The Bank of Ghana recently introduced a regulatory sandbox for fintechs so that they can come and test out, right? Isn't that interesting? They can come and test out the regulations, right? Break a few regulations in the sandbox and then figure it out before they roll it out so that they don't launch and then have to be shut down. Brilliant idea, right? So again, yes, sandboxes are not of the West. We're starting to see them all around us. So the question is, how do we localize them to what we're doing as entrepreneurs, as leaders of NGOs, as mid-level managers of organizations, maybe you're the topmost decision maker, but you can bring in ideas to sort of enhance the productivity of your organization. What will be your sandbox? What will it look like? So the point here is that simulations and sandboxes are not enough. You will still need a process to guide you through it, right? And here's where the design thinking process comes in. For those who are not familiar with design thinking, this is what we call the double diamond model, right? So the idea here is that you have a problem on the far left, you're going all the way to solution. Typically, people start from the middle and just jump to solutions, right? You have a problem, they sit around the table, they talk about it, and before you know it, they are making decisions, spending money. What design thinking is saying is take a step back, try to understand the problem, go do some empathetic ethnographic research. You get a lot of data from a variety of sources, conduct some sense-making exercises to make sense of it, get a point of view in the middle here, then ideate, right? Then ideate. You have many ideas, use prototyping to narrow down those ideas into a solution, So there is this divergence, convergence flow. So you diverge at the beginning because you're collecting data and information from so many different sources. You converge because you're conducting sense making to a point of view. You diverge because you're looking at so many potential alternative solutions to your to what you're trying to solve. You converge through prototyping to the final solution. I see there's something in the chat here. Yeah, all right. Yeah, Eugene says in times of crisis, what you have in your full control as an organization is your skills and competencies, yes, and how well you can adapt. Very good point. So in many ways, the point we're trying to make today is that simulations using design thinking will be the idea of not waiting to solve a problem, right? So if you're saying, well, we don't have problems right now, so yeah, maybe I'll just listen to this. What we're saying here is, if you want to embrace the concept of a solution, of simulation for innovation, you don't have to have a problem to solve. You can look for problems within, because there's always problems, right? You can look for problems within the organization now and simulate what that innovation process would look like, right? You don't have to be pushed to the wall right now for this to matter to you. So it'd be good to get your feedback in the chat. But here are some suggested sort of concepts for thinking about marrying design thinking and this idea of if you think of it as a simulation mindset, right? What does it mean to go through a design thinking process if you don't have a problem right now to solve, right? So one of the things it will mean is that at the problems phase, you can just focus on celebrating problems, right? Problem festivals. So you say, all right, let's look in this angle of the company. Let's look at the product use around this particular segment and see what problems are there. It's not staring in the face. It is not pressing right now. You are going out and looking for them and analyzing them and celebrating them, right? So this becomes a process that you go through. It becomes something that the organization does, you know, holding problem festivals, not focus on solutions, just the problems, you know. What problems can we celebrate this month? You know, absurd, but what it then does is that it helps you generate a list of problems. You know, in many ways, you're, you know, bringing that simulation mindset, right? Again, here are proposals, so it'd be really good to hear your feedback to this narrative. And then what would it mean for the research phase? It would just be saying that, you know, we just want to go on an insight binge, right? So our product is working well, our company is working well. Let's try and dig deeper and see if we can get some insights, right? So let's just go on an insights binge. Let's go and do ethnography, get some cool insights, come and pop them on the wall and just be happy, you know? So again, this idea that it is not pressing right now, you are sort of simulating it, right? The mindset. What would it mean for when coming up with solutions? There are a lot of companies who will develop solutions and send them to competitions, idea competitions, win an award, and you come to the company and it's on the wall, right? It's not part of their products. It is an exploration into a space. It is a solution that may be futuristic, maybe an analogy. They won a prize. And the reason why it won a prize is because somebody worked on it, even though it is not related to current business, or it may be related, but it is not implemented. It's not a problem because you don't know when it will come in handy or what it could be added to make impact in the future. And then maybe the last bit there for prototyping is building sandboxes, right? So in a lot of companies, people will come up with new ideas. And because of this problem of the organization not being ready to absorb the ideas, the people feel like they're not appreciated, right? And the ideas just die. So when you come and say, oh, let's do ideation, they're like, well, the last time we came up with ideas, nothing happened, right? How do you solve that problem? Sandboxes, right? Sandboxes where you can test these ideas, continue to test them without this process affecting the current regular routines of the organization. So it would be the question of what would a sandbox look like for your organization, right? How do you need to build it? Who do you need to engage, and so forth? So the proposal for this marriage between simulations and design thinking, or simulation mindset, taken through a design thinking process, is to build these things as processes or activities that the organization engages in, you know. And I'm going to pause here and get some discussion on it. So let's say we focus a little bit more on how to build respond to anything, how to build effective sandboxes, you know. I'll say, and I don't know, I think David is back, right? Because David and I have had lots of conversation about sandboxes. You know, it will be important to get like-minded co-developers for the sandbox, because a lot of people will say, but why are we trying to focus on problems that have no bearing right now? You know, don't you have enough work to do? So you need like-minded people who are happy to engage with you in building, going through this process. You might have to include stakeholders. Sometimes you might have to go to a stakeholder and say, what if this and that and that and that? And they will say, what? But that's not a problem. So you need to recruit stakeholders who understand this concept of simulations and sandboxes, right? So that you can be more effective. And then in terms of simulations, you can think of project-based simulations, very narrow, right? So here you are, maybe as a real problem, it's a beckoning problem, a problem that has pressure right now that you're solving, but maybe you're not ready, you want to explore it, but you're not ready to implement. So you can target that into a sandbox, right? Where you continue testing until you're ready to implement. Or we can think of it as a process-based approach where it's broad. We're looking at these 4 areas. We're building systems and activities around these ideas of problem festivals, insights benches, idea showcases, and then building sandboxes that will engage with them. And then we always have to make sure that we're scheduling celebrations, right? We're celebrating getting 10 insights from this research. So it's worth, some barbecue and some beer or some Fanta, Again, what is the context here? Organizations need to innovate. It's not a choice. If you don't innovate, the natural rhythm is for you to die. A lot of organizations are too busy on the business of today. And so naturally they will wait for a problem before they innovate. But the idea here is that you don't have to wait. You can simulate a lot of these things, right? You can look into the future, ask what if, what if, what if? And even if the solutions are not ready to be implemented, you can sandbox them. So that's the big picture here, opening it up. David, are you there? All right. So there is I think a perfect example is how some companies, telecom communications and IT companies especially, sponsor student hackathons. Yep. They use some of these to contract students who have the skills, the time, the excitement, etc., to do the exploration for them without disrupting their operations. Perfect. Right. So here you are bringing in the talent, you are developing the system right outside and not, and checking it out, and so you can see the case where if telecoms take these ideas into their sandboxes and continue to test them with a mimicked version of their solution, they would be, closer to getting some really, really good solutions before they come out, well-tested solutions before they implement them. Opening it up, comments, questions. What do you think? Is it resonating? Are you ready to do it? What would you change? Any questions? Any additions? Who's saying, okay, resonating, ready to do it? All right. Raphael, do you want to put some voice to that? Maybe give us some specifics. What now you're thinking, maybe I could do this and that and that.
Right. Very, very insightful and interesting. Especially with the sandboxes. I am thinking along that line for something I discovered today. A little issue came up at the office, and I realized that primarily it has got to do with some problem with the system we are running. So in order not to disrupt the current, projects we are running and the routines around, maybe I would have to look into adopting the simulation strategy you are teaching. So we try and run something around it and see how best we can resolve the issue before, and then incorporate it later into our already running system, so we can solve the problem.
That's wonderful. Let's hear from other people who have already done this. What was the experience like? What did you build a sandbox for? And how did it go? Yeah, Betty says ready to look for prospective problems and solve them before they become real problems. It's a really good attitude. Yeah, it's exactly the point. Not waiting. Yes, Derry, hands up, I see.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, this is better.
Okay, sure. So I wasn't the employer or the owner of the business, but in my second internship when I was in school, the owner of the company, a biogas company, dedicated the internship program to test new marketing strategies, and also so he has these little pebbles that he makes himself as part of the biogas production process. So we, the interns, were dedicated to working on those things, and he went about doing his business. And when he comes back, he'll come and review whatever we've done to see whether we were making progress or not. So by the end of the internship period, he had tested some of the things that he had in mind. We had come to add on them. And then I think he had a good sense of where it would go next. So I think that's a good example of how to practice this sandbox thing we are talking about.
That's wonderful. So we had systems, you couldn't figure out how to test them. But of course, again, that's a really good way of not burdening your current staff with innovation simulations that don't support or help them do the work that they are already overwhelmed with, right? So why not bring in some interns to explore a problem area, you know, and see, learn from the problem and potential solutions that you can deploy. All right, anybody else who's tried this, who's built sandboxes, has implemented this process of simulation and wants to share with us, or seen it, perhaps? You can just unmute and share. Okay, so what I'd like to do is to go into a breakout room for about, yeah, maybe like 7 minutes, not long. BTGH facilitators, please distribute yourself in the rooms because you already know, you're already familiar with how the breakout rooms, I mean, so many people are familiar with it, but so you can also help people in the breakout rooms. BTGA facilitators, if you find yourself with 3 other facilitators, please come back and join another breakout room. So we're going to go into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. And on there, the question is, so when you go into when you go onto the link, I'll show the link in a moment. When you go onto the link, my screen is showing, right? So here's the link that is in the chat. You will see there are 4 rooms, so you can just choose which room. I mean, choose the slide that corresponds with the room you're in, right? Choose the slide that corresponds with the room you're in. And what we're trying to do here is that your team just drags Post-it notes from the left here onto the screen, and you choose maybe one person in the team, one person in the room, or there's a couple of you. No, you can just talk about challenges you see with building problem festival activities and some opportunities that it has, challenges you see with conducting insights benches, maybe in your company, challenges you see with just innovating for competitions and showcases, challenges you see with building sandboxes. And then you can just, list them for about 7 minutes, and then we'll come back and share. Matt, can you check out room 2?
Room 2.
Yes, they're asking for help.
Okay.
All right, welcome back. Welcome back. It looks like some very interesting discussions, even though not all teams' rooms were able to write on the sheets, but it's very clear that some really interesting discussions went on there. Can we hear from each room? So maybe let's start with room 1.
I think I'll let Betty and Raphael do their presentation for us.
Yeah.
So Betty, you can talk about your business as the case study, and then Raphael, you can take us through what we discussed.
Very briefly too.
Okay, sure. Hello, everyone. So I gave a background of the business I'm running. So it's poultry farming, and we take birds and then slaughter them, then supply to butcheries or to other customers who buy in bulk. So should I go on to discuss the challenges?
For the sake of time, you can go ahead so that we don't.
So in our discussion, we were discussing what are some of the challenges that are preventing you from, I guess, solving the problems that you're seeing. So we discussed one of them was financial limitation, and this was on to buy land, a bigger space for the broiler farming, and then limited publications on the problems. Sometimes you realize there's a problem, but then you don't have full information on the problem because of limited publication. And someone raised the point that sometimes it's not because there's limited publication, but it may be that the person is not interested in reading. Yeah, the resources are there, but then you're not just reading. And then another point we raised was limited infrastructure, knowledge on the hubs or centers where you can get this information. Yeah, I think Rafo could carry on from there.
Okay, so regarding the testing stage, or putting out there a prototype, we're saying that one of the challenges would be limited resources. Where you have an idea, you would want to show it out to people, but the materials you may need to, do the prototype is scarce or not available. And then the last stage is what can prevent us from having a sandbox. We are saying sometimes the legal requirements are strict, and then to some extent, the lack of knowledge on the side of the entrepreneur or whoever would wish to, do that. If the person doesn't know sandboxes even exist, I think it will be a major challenge. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think the first one, what prevent people from actually looking for the problem, the first stage, the team, some of the points that came out was that if people have narrow view of their business, limited perspective, then they will not be looking for new opportunities to find problems and all of that. And then also, if they are not proactive, they are very relaxed and lazy about their business or whatever they are doing, then it will not even push them to look for problems in order to innovate. I just wanted to add that. So that's from.
Right. It's very interesting, right? And in many ways as well, I think what we have to remember is that people do pilot projects all the time, right? So in many ways, it's also the question of whether there can be pilot projects that are done in ways that make it look like sandboxes. Betty, I don't know if pilot projects make sense from this perspective.
Sorry, what was the question?
I was asking whether pilot projects, like doing small pilots, maybe different types of birds, small pilots, different kinds of feeding and so forth.
Yes, that's a very good idea, because different brands of feed, they have a different what can I say, effectiveness in how the rate at which birds grow. So if you do that, like the pilot project with a small batch, you'll be able to test out like which feed is the best, and even like which bird grows fast according to like what you need. and also which is good for the market that you're working for. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think the encouragement will be that you try multiple pilots. Again, your finances will allow, but if you did pilots that were of interest, you'll be surprised at what you find. You might come up with a new type of feed, bed size and bed weight sort of configuration, and that could be your new S-curve, right? So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for offering your business for the exercise. All right, so let's go to room 2.
I know for room 2, we had Ike who was really active, so I'd love for Ike to present on our behalf. All I'll say is for us, we looked at a case study of an interesting project Ike did, which was around like food losses during transportation, and a sandbox looking into the practice of drivers transporting food, the barriers they face on the road with things like police unnecessarily stopping them and all those other elements, and looking into how they can make that whole process more efficient and develop an app that sort of tracks the different elements to provide more efficiencies for the drivers. And so we were doing an analysis of the systems within that sandbox and how it helped them better understand the problem and what that whole process looked like. So Ike, if you can share some of the thoughts from the conversation.
Yeah, good evening to us all. It was a project to help reduce post-harvest losses. And then our focus was on the tomato we get from Burkina. So we started that we used to track our journey from Tema, from Burkina, the farms to Accra. And then that was the corridor we were using. So we were considering the nature of the road that these drivers were applying on. So the app would gather all these road pavement qualities. It would also gather data on the challenges that drivers encounter on their way. So anything that was contributing to the produce not getting to their final destination early, these were points of interest that we were gathering data on. And then from the project, I'll see if I can say that from the sandbox, let me use a term, that there were a number of parameters that we were unable to think through from the start of the project. But by the time we finished with the project, we got to know that there are numerous factors that have influence on what we were looking at that we even initially did not think of. So that's what I can say for now until maybe there's a follow-up question.
That's really interesting.
Even with that, one of the really interesting things Ike shared, which I thought would be nice for the whole group to know, was around assumptions. So one of the things they realized is beyond just there being police barriers and stuff, the trucks break down a lot. And so they had this intuition that, hey, if the trucks break down, why don't we have remote technicians who can be available to the truck drivers as a solution? But then they found out that the drivers only trust their personal mechanics. So even if you give them a remote mechanic, they would not use the person because they do not trust them. So it created a really important conversation around sometimes do we infer in the sandbox process and try to put our own ideas on the drivers. And that's where we ended, but it was a very interesting point to end on. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
That's really cool, right? So because you can see how you can basically pick up and do model, right, and capture all the police barriers. In fact, I've heard of this, not this particular project, but another research that looked at impediments for moving tomato, and they counted 77 police barriers between the north and Accra. And because of that, when they did their cost analysis, it was cheaper to import tomatoes from Brazil than to bring them from the north. It's very interesting. So, but you can see how you can model this on, even using Google Maps, right? And be able to pinpoint all of them and do your calculations. If a truck breaks down here, how fast, how quick, and all of that. So hopefully there are some insights there about simulations. Let's go to group 3. I'm looking at the time. I want to play that video as the last thing before we close. So group 3, can you make it really fast for us? Thank you, group 2.
George, Mary, and Papayu, I guess I can speak on your behalf, but feel free to jump in. So we dived in really straight, and they sought to identify what is standing in the way of building such solutions for our businesses. And we thought the first point that came up was not having enough expertise in the technical or the tech side of things. So we could have, know about the business and all of that, but we may not have the tools to lead such simulation exercise to make it make sense, for the other team members. The other part is the resources, and this will be time, financial resources, etc. Usually in an organization, it's very difficult to justify an expense, right? By saying what's the business case. But at that moment, we may not really have a strong justification. So that in itself would be a barrier for such a case. And at the team level, we anticipate a lot of compromise. So people might be used to a certain way of doing work, but this time we're saying let's think more broadly. And let's even think about what's not there as a problem yet. So that whole uncertainty around the exploration might not be taken very well by the team members and the stakeholders. Makes it look like you've gathered us and you don't even know the problem you're talking about. Who does that, right? So these are some challenges anticipated. No doubt for opportunities, definitely tech enabling. So these simulations could bring out very professional, yes, things that we're thinking about. There's some that I haven't met that and of course, there's also, we see the opportunity of having a real time, like a platform to have real time testing of some of these solutions or ideas that come up. Yeah, putting ourselves out there to explore new ideas from talented people, whether at the same level or potential users or stakeholders of the process. I'll pause here, but yeah, it's feel free to add anything. What's you?
Yeah, very, very interesting point about, mindset, how to make sure that you explain to people very well that we're running a simulation. We're running on a problem that doesn't exist right now. But trust me, it's a good thing to do. It's good to spend that money on transportation or that money on lunch or that money on a few drinks on a problem that doesn't exist. It's like, don't you have enough problems to focus on? But that is a mindset that needs to be countered because again, companies don't have a choice to innovate. They have to innovate. And we have to find ways of helping them innovate. I want to very quickly go to the recording from my colleague, which I think you would thoroughly enjoy. Play and
Hello, my name is Teresa, and I am an HR practitioner and also part of Design Thinking Ghana. I'm going to share a few minutes with you to talk about takeaways from a course I studied from IDEO called Activating Strategy. Great. So strategy in the first place is choice. It's a sort of choices that we make, right? It's an articulation of the core bets you are placing to bring your desired vision of the future to your workplace. And in this course, there were some key, should I say, concepts and questions that would help bring your strategy to life. Some of these questions were, what is our winning aspiration? So what is your winning aspiration when you plan a strategy, or what captures your strategy? When will you play with this strategy? How will you win For me, I always find the word win very important. It is a key thing to always take note of, no matter how small. But then when you're activating strategy, you're also thinking of how will we win? What capabilities would be decisive? And then what management systems would be needed? These are all key questions that you need to think through when you're activating strategy. And to be honest, these questions really guided the whole course. I want to say something before I talk about my key takeaways, which are, we believe that the key to activating strategy is to design for it from the very beginning. So it means approaching strategy with the end goal in mind, taking both the people and the process into account. Now I'm going to dive into my key takeaways from activating strategy, and I'll also encourage you to take up this course or any other course on IGO that you find interesting. Now, first of all, in activating strategy course, we were allowed to use one active or one realistic strategy that we're implementing, and I got a chance to do that. Now, the first thing I studied, or should I say I gained as a great insight, was to create engagements and plan engagement moments with stakeholders of your strategy. Now, your stakeholders are people who will be critical in the success of your strategy and need to take action to ensure implementation. Second thing is visualizing and crafting your strategy story to make it more realistic and tangible to all stakeholders and collaborators. So using tools like storyboarding and journey maps. The reason is people need to understand why the strategic choices are being made and what it means to them. It also includes prototyping the possibilities and testing your assumptions. Now, the last thing I took away was to activate your strategy through defining capabilities and management systems needed to enable and support your strategy. I found this very important also because as much as you go through all the process of making your strategy tangible and getting all the buy-in and all the collaboration from stakeholders, prototyping and testing, you need to make sure you have the right tools, capabilities, and systems in place to activate and support your strategy. This includes sketching out a plan to take action. So in conclusion, I like to say activating strategy is about making choices, and simulating innovation is also about making choices through the design thinking approach. I wish I was here with you live, but I know you're enjoying this session and you're in great hands. Thank you, and I'll catch up with you later.
All right, thank you, Teresa. So there we have it. Any final thoughts? Our goal was to explore this concept of simulations in sandboxes. And we made the point that companies need to, small or large, need to innovate. It's not a choice they make. Or it's the choice they make. They need to choose to innovate, right? They don't decide not to. So let me put it that way, based on what Teresa just said. You need to choose to activate your innovation strategy. Regular routines are real. Disrupting them is a problem. And so what it means is that we need to look at examples of other companies that are doing this, that are building simulations, that are building sandboxes for these simulations, and figure out ways of using design thinking as a guide, developing activities at each of these design thinking points as routine. Let's routinely celebrate problems. Let's routinely look for insights. How do chicken grow fast? Let's just explore. Let's come up with ideas and celebrate them and apply for conferences and showcase these ideas, put them on the wall. Let's build sandboxes to implement and test out the ideas that we have, even though we are not ready to fully commercialize or fully take them out there into or incorporate them into our regular routines. And hopefully those are useful steps that you can think about and keep in mind as you continue